surprise in a way, in that the Brexit Party is being so incredibly bold in deciding to go all out in sort of all-out war against Boris Johnson. You know, standing in every single seat, chuck out your deal, or we're going to hammer you. Sort of is the message. And yet, on this, Farage seems to be being quite a coward. I mean, yes, I guess he just doesn't want to lose another election, having stood however many times. I think I've lost count of how many times he stood for Parliament. And Seven, and never managed to get a seat. And it is getting a bit embarrassing for him. So I think the reason is that he's worried that he's going to lose. He's worried that the Tories are going to throw everything into whatever seat he contests. And of course, all of the established parties have a lot more presence on the ground than the Brexit Party. It's quite difficult to run elections when you just don't have those numbers. You don't have those databases all set up. It's a very new party. So it would be a challenge for Farage. But what I think is surprising is that, having been so bold, he's now doing something which isn't bold at all. And you'd think once you've thrown all your chips in, you may as well keep going.
Mike, he said to Tim Shipman in that article that he had been offered a peerage twice in order to basically take the Brexit Party into a position where they're only going to be contesting about 20 seats. Basically, he's been offered a peerage twice for cooperation with the Conservatives. He also said, again, big sort of claims here, that Richard Tice had been offered a safe Conservative seat and an offer to stand as a Conservative in one of the Shire seats. And he says to Tim Shipman, I wasn't going to be bought out, you know, etc., etc. Now, it's very important to say, Tim Shipman also says in his article that a number 10 source, or a Conservative source, said all this was just gossip and nothing was substantiated, but they refused to deny any of Farage's claims. So you just never know. And you're going to have to take all this with a bucket load of salt. But, you know, look, Farage really surprised people on Friday by announcing the Brexit Party stance, which was, Boris Johnson, drop your deal, or face the Brexit Party standing against you in every single seat. And now, 2 days after, the leader of the Brexit Party refuses to stand in the general election. You've sort of lost the race before you've even begun, haven't you?
Well, it depends what the goal is. I mean, as I said before we came on air, the point is, if they want to win MPs, then Nigel Farage standing would certainly give a bit of a fillip to their campaign. However, I think what this is really about is Nigel Farage knows if he enters the race, I think there's a potential for greater divisions within the Leave vote out there at the moment. And among, you know, large numbers of that particular section of the electorate, Boris Johnson remains incredibly popular. And I think we have to look back a couple of weeks to when Nigel Farage criticised Boris Johnson following his new Brexit deal with the EU, and then had to swiftly row back on those comments. I think in those couple of weeks, Farage has been taking the temperature among his support base, and he's realised that large numbers of soft Conservative voters who may be drawn over by a harder Brexit stance of the Brexit Party still like Boris Johnson. And if Nigel Farage runs against Boris Johnson, even in another seat, even if not directly in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, that is going to present some division, and that can be exploited by the so-called Remain alliance.
Do you think another party can say, look, we'll give you our support to form a government only if your leader who won that election stands down? That's never going to happen. Is there precedent for that? Has that ever happened?
I think it depends if it's a convincing, you know, I think it all depends on the seats. If the Lib Dems get a huge number of seats and Jeremy Corbyn the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn is just the largest party, it won't really feel like a win for Labour. Sure. I think there is a chance that Jo Swinson would then really hold the keys to number 10 and could kind of do whatever she likes, maybe including ousting Jeremy Corbyn. But I think, going back to what you're saying, I don't think that's inconceivable. And I think the Lib Dems are being quite careful not to rule that out. I mean, yes, she says she won't work with Conservatives under Boris Johnson. I mean, everyone has to say that before an election, otherwise their whole campaign is a bit silly. But she doesn't personally lay into Boris Johnson in the way that she personally lays into Jeremy Corbyn. So I think she's leaving the door a tiny bit open to the possibility of a coalition with the Conservatives or some sort of confidence and supply agreement on the proviso that Boris puts a referendum on.
I think they're Lib Dems throwing things at their radio right now.
Sure
just the thought, just the thought of the Liberal Democrats.
I said this to my Lib Dem friend. She was like, no,
going back into coalition with the Conservatives.
I see one possibility for this, and this just happens to be maybe a vote-by-vote arrangement. If Boris happens to get the largest number of seats or a very slim majority, and the Lib Dems are able to amend the withdrawal agreement bill when it's brought back in any Queen's speech to include a second referendum. But I cannot see any sort of formal arrangement between the Lib Dems and the Tories. They're just too far apart on Brexit, and the Lib Dems have staked their entire identity this election on the antithesis of Boris's approach.
We are, as you said, we're talking about micro-targeting seats. There's a lot of seats that are hanging in the balance. We are already seeing a sort of a Remain alliance sort of, agreement happening. We're already seeing that the Isle of Wight, for example, we have Green candidate being promoted in the sense that the Liberal Democrats and Plaid Cymru and everybody else standing down, but not Labour, of course, not yet, in favour of the Green candidate. We're going to see the same at Brighton Pavilion with Caroline Lucas's seat. Broxtowe, Anna Soubry is going to fight uncontested. And I also think that Dominic Grieve is going to see some sort of coalition. He's standing as an independent in his former constituency. Is Labour going to join in any of these sort of alliance, standing down, letting a candidate have something free?
I'll be honest, no, because the opposition party has to be seen to have national reach. Now, tactically, it would make a great deal of sense because, as we all know, there are certain seats in which the Labour Party could never win. You know, deepest, darkest, rural Leicestershire is a good example of that, outside Duncan's seat of Melton and Rutland. But the Labour Party has to be seen to have national ambitions. Now, of course, it would make sense to them to, not to run paper candidates in Hampshire in the same way that the Tories running candidates, perhaps, in safe states like Tottenham, where I live at the moment. However, what this might mean is behind the scenes, we could see some more, particularly in... The trouble is Labour isn't going to benefit in the seats where it's more profound pro-Remain stance is going to benefit. So Cambridge, for example, the Lib Dems are going to go for Labour hard on that one because they know that the very strong pro-Remain message that the Lib Dems embody against Labour is going to give them that seat. So there is no incentive really for the other parties to draft Labour in because their whole stance is predicated on being further on Remain than Labour is at the moment.
What do Labour do then? So let's take Cambridge as an example. What do they do? Do they put up a candidate and just not put that much effort behind that candidate?
Well, Daniel Zlank is very strong pro-second referendum candidate in Cambridge. The trouble is that a large numbers of Labour MPs increasing numbers have been pro-second referendum for a very long time now. Not many are pro-revoke, it has to be said, because they're aware of the sort of complex politics around that and the difficulty of getting it through the House. Even if there was a majority for a Labour government, because there's still about 20 to 30 MPs at least who would be quite strongly pro-Leave. This is why Labour is going to struggle to come to some sort of arrangement here because this is what Olivia was alluding to earlier with Jo Swinson going after Jeremy Corbyn more because she knows that she can pick up more votes from the Labour side by criticising Jeremy Corbyn's seeming ambiguity over Brexit, even though he has moved on this issue in the last 12 to 15 months, than she does from going after Boris because those voters for the Conservative Party already know they want to deliver Brexit. So she's going to be... Basically, the Lib Dems are trying to pick up Labour voters in this election.
Olivia, do you think the Conservatives do have something to worry about if we see lots of tactical voting and some sort of, non-official agreement, non-aggression pact? I mean, it was quoted again in the Sunday Times that Tories are worried that they will lose the majority, they think, if Labour win Lib Dem seats or if we see tactical voting on a massive scale.
Well, I sort of feel that people always get very excited about tactical voting at the beginning of an election campaign. And when it comes down to it and people are in the ballot boxes, there's just so much tribalism still. I mean, I know people say that Brexit has broken down tribal party politics, but I don't really think it has. I think everyone talks about it and everyone says, oh yeah, I'm going to swap my vote with this person, blah, blah, blah. And then when they get to the ballot box, they can't help just voting for the party who they want to win the election. I mean, I tell myself I live in an incredibly safe Labour seat, and I tell myself that I'm going to vote tactically. I'm sure when I get to the ballot box, I won't. And I think there are probably quite a lot of people like me. So I think this might all be a bit of beginning of election campaign fluff in a way.
Belonging to a customs union and alignment to single market is a Brexit deal that would work better than the Brexit deals on offer. But I still don't believe it would be better than the current arrangement we've got with reform. And that's the position. But look, my my argument of this election is that this can no longer be decided by the politicians in this Parliament, but actually Parliament needs to seek further instruction from the people on this issue, and that's what the final say. That's what the final say policy is about.
Okay, understood. But here's the issue. You are asking for a vote for the Labour Party. The Labour Party's policy, as we've both agreed, is that within 6 months, they're going to go to Brussels and negotiate a better deal. Let's put the fact that it's taken us 3 years to get to this point and the fact that the Labour Party are going to do it in 6 months aside. But let's say a lot of the groundwork has been done. And let's say for you, James, let's say for you, James, they come back with a customs. We're in the customs union. We have access to the single market. Then what do? You're in a constituency that voted to leave. What do you do, James? Do you support in a referendum, which you've promised to the people, do you support to remain, or do you support the deal that your leadership has gone and negotiated? And the fact that you can't answer that to me, but you're asking your constituents for a vote is a bit problematic.
No, well, it's not problematic. You're either not listening or you just
I am listening
through questions. No, or you're working through questions. I have absolutely answered that. You haven't until now asked me what I would vote for. I would vote Remain in any subsequent final say,
right.
And that's across all my media. So I don't know where you're sort of trying to take that, but I've been consistent throughout all of that. I maintain an integrity view that is, having been elected as a known Remainer in a marginally Leave seat. My view, my judgment is that the people need to decide what next. A customs union Brexit, by the way, was available within months of the referendum. So let's pretend that that is unavailable to us.
Yes.
And under a new government, that would of course be afforded. The fact is, it was May then Johnson's red lines that take us to a point where we've got the worst of both deals, and we risk dividing the United Kingdom.
The idea that 17.4 million people voted for one thing has now been completely torpedoed when you have Nigel Farage on one side and Boris Johnson on the other, both saying that their version of Brexit is the true Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, they almost tipped their hand from the start. We should have seen this coming when there were 2 Leave campaigns in 2016.
Okay, but it's all very well us saying that there is a problem on the Leave side, but it's not as if the Remain side are all happy bedfellows together. We have Jo Swinson, who keeps repeating the statement that she thinks Jeremy Corbyn is unfit to be Prime Minister. You have the Labour Party refusing to do any sort of non-aggression deals in seats. This remains to be seen. We still have 6 weeks to go, so these might change. And you seem to have an unsettled house from the Remain side. How much of that is a concern to you? Surely you want everybody on the Remain side to be singing from the same hymn sheet.
100%. I mean,
but are you concerned that they're not?
Yeah, I am, because essentially one of the reasons why people voted for Brexit in 2016 was that feeling that the political class, those who work in politics, are more obsessed with their own little political games than what's in the best interest of the country. And if the people on the Remain side aren't able to put their differences aside in the best interests of the country, when we know that we're already fighting an uphill battle, because in 2017, the majority voted for parties that ruled out no deal, yet because of our broken electoral system, the majority of seats went to parties that were in favor of no deal. We know we're fighting an uphill battle, so they have to work together. If they don't and prefer their own political games, they're not change, they're more of the same. So I am calling on Jeremy Corbyn, on Jo Swinson, please, in the best interests of the country, work together, defeat Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. That is necessary.
Do you think there's any chance that they will listen to your calls?
Well, it depends on whether or not their values are true. I mean, they know that if they compete against each other in marginal seats, they just give seats to the Tories. I mean, for example, Theresa Villiers' seat is one where the Remain vote was extremely strong in 2016, and the majority in 2017 voted for parties that were against Brexit, or at least against a hard Brexit. Yet she's the person who speaks for that constituency. If you have the parties that are in favour of stopping this mess competing against each other, it only weakens us.
A good example, I think, as well, is Zach Goldsmith's seat in Richmond. The Liberal Democrats, it's been going back and forth between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. I mean, if Labour stand a solid candidate there, all they're going to do is give Zach Goldsmith his seat back.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing in in Stroud, in Cheltenham, in Stroud,
Cambridge.
a couple of Lib Dem seats going to the Labour candidate in Stroud would have meant a Labour candidate instead of a Tory. A couple of Labour candidates going to the Lib Dems in Cheltenham would have meant a Lib Dem candidate rather than a Tory. We have to vote tactically, otherwise you're essentially voting for Nigel Farage's Brexit Party.